Hello, and we're downsizing the studio. We've had to sell off 60% of the studio space.
And that's because we're going full borrower by 2025. It's been a long-term vision of ours.
We've got an Irish cuisine restaurant just immediately to our right here. Hi, welcome to a very special episode of Zelf on the Shelf. Today we're joined by No Nonsense Spirituality. Give it up, everybody. Welcome to the show.
Welcome, Brett.
Glad to be here.
How are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to see where we go today. I have no idea. We'll find out when we get there.
So true.
Tell us a little about yourself, how you got into apostasy and what is the word? Hereticism? Hereticery?
I like that one. Maybe being heretical. Yeah. My heresy. Yeah. So I was raised Mormon, and I was a pretty good Mormon kid. And then the heresy had begun to sneak in by the time I was a teenager, which got me kicked out of my home. Because I was one of those licked cupcakes, and you can't have those around. Those are not good.
You got kicked out?
I did. I was 16 years old for licked cupcake reasons, and also just rebellious reasons in general, and became kind of, I would call, a nuanced Mormon after that, because I wanted to find, I think, some way to reconcile with my family, and I found some deeper Mormon stuff than I had seen previously. So I was a nuanced Mormon by the time I was about 17. I didn't know that's what it was called, but that's definitely what I was doing. But then just kept deconstructing, and so eventually had more of a full-blown classic faith crisis after I had my first child, and then kept going. So lost Mormonism, then lost religion in general. I spent some time in mainstream Christianity or interfaith religion. Then I lost God, and then I lost free will, and then I just kept losing anchors as I went. I just kind of kept deconstructing everything until I reached what we call nihilism, or the void, when you just really have nothing. You have no beliefs about really anything. And that was difficult, and found tools to help me in that space. So the work that I do now is meeting people anywhere that they are on that spectrum, whether they're on the deconstructing part or reconstructing part, or we're always kind of doing both continuously anyway as adults. And so I just like to help people where they are and find the right tool for them. That feels, safe and authentic for them, for whatever they're deconstructing or reconstructing in their spiritual life.
So you went from, you're not no nonsense nihilism. You are no nonsense spirituality. So I'm assuming there was a path out of the nihilistic abyss there, or is it just finding the tools to cope and integrate the nihilism?
It's a little bit more the second one. So my tagline is that we don't run from the harsh truths of reality. We certainly don't run to supernatural stories. I think that's one of the benefits of being an ex-Mormon. You get a pretty sensitive BS meter when someone is playing truth claim games, and I just instantly, my body is just like, nope, not playing that game anymore. And so it's not that kind of spirituality. It's not, oh, let's leave religion, but let's start playing manifestation games, or let's leave religion, but let's start doing this, equally superstitious thing over here. It's more so, what are the root tools in spirituality, kind of unconnected to dogma or truth claims, that can help us to build lives that can meet the harsh, that can rise to meet the harsh realities. So it's really building a life in light of death, in light of knowing that I'm going to die, in light of knowing that maybe the universe doesn't care that I'm here. What's a kind of intentional life that I can build that can withstand a harsh truth like that? And I'm more interested in kind of that aspect of it, rather than trying to find a story that makes it all okay. I don't want to play that game anymore.
Yeah. Did you start studying philosophy from your licked cupcake era, or did that at what point did you?
Philosophy, I would say, was always my mistress. Like any uh, like any wise adult who sees a 17-year-old kid who wants to major in philosophy, they pushed me in another direction. And, maybe that was fair. So, when I was working before I had children, and where, I'm able to work from home to do this work that I do now in coaching. But before I did that, I was a history teacher. And so that was technically my day job. And I went into, I was really pushed by pretty much every adult that I knew, and every, school counselor, like, maybe you want to do something that you can make some money doing. So I was a history teacher, and that was really my trade, but I was really always doing philosophy.
Honestly, hard to separate the two,
Yeah, and even as a history teacher, I was basically doing philosophy. I was just kind of using history to do it. Like, hey, let's talk about the Holocaust and what it means, for us as humans. And like, have you met the part of you that's a Nazi who would not only do this but also enjoy it? You need to meet that part of you, and how does that show up? And so, like, I was doing stuff like that when I was, I wasn't one of those like World War II airplane history teachers that just get super into that stuff. I was doing human stuff. I was doing philosophy, but I was just using history to do it.
Encouraging kids to connect to the inner Nazi in order to get away from it is a fun.
Hey, we all have to meet that part of us.
Yes. I mean, that's a big theme of our channel. We talk a lot about unshaming work and shadow work, which I know you're really into. With the history thing in mind, I feel like that's a good segue for something I really wanted to ask you, which is, given the moment politically right now, first of all, kind of how have you been feeling? What have you been thinking about in light of, I guess, election results is my first question.
Yeah, that's a big question. I will say one of the benefits of being a nihilist is, some people were really, like, especially some of my clients over the past 2 weeks have really been struggling. And I understand why. It wasn't the results that I was hoping for. I took my daughters with me to vote. My daughters are children of color. I was hoping that it would be a moment that they would remember. I really wanted to tell them a different story the next morning when they woke up and asked me who won. So I did have, some feelings about that. But the great thing about intentionally building your life on what you find meaningful and really building that in is that whatever's going on in the world doesn't totally send me into a spiral. So if you were to tell me that religion is going to win, patriarchy is going to win, secular spirituality, secular society is never going to work, we're just too culty by nature, too superstitious by nature, too tribal by nature. Perhaps these are things that we'll never really ever overcome because of what we are. If you were to tell me that, and like, hey, religion's going to win and we're going to blow each other up, and then the universe doesn't care and there's going to be no record of any of this. If you told me that that was going to happen and had some reliable, where I would trust that that was going to happen, I would still wake up today and do what I do. I would still wake up tomorrow and do what I do. These are the people and projects that I've built my life on, that I care about. So even if a comet was going to hit the earth in a month, I would still wake up and do what I do. I would still be like, hey, you guys want to talk? Like, let's talk about the comet. Let's talk about if aliens are watching this. Let's talk. Like, I've just so intentionally built my life on the things that I find meaningful at the level of experience, that whatever's going on in the world then doesn't affect the meaning that I've built into my own life. So I'm fairly stable. As far as election results, I don't believe in free will. So everybody kind of acted how I expected everybody to act. White men who feel threatened acted the way that I expected them to act. White women who historically give up their power for proximity to power did exactly how I expected them to act. Each religion, based on how much they value loyalty and hierarchy and authority, acted how each religion you would expect them to act. So everybody kind of acted how I expected them to act, and I still get up each day and do the work that I find meaningful.
Yeah, I actually really relate to that line of thinking, like when it feels like possibly humans will never be able to go beyond their love of cult-like thinking, I'll just think, well, we're this species of ape, and there was never any guarantee that there's, that there's going to be some beautiful ending or like eventual utopia we're going to get to.
Yeah.
You watch Rick and Morty?
Mm-mm.
Oh, I feel like you would love Rick and Morty, but when it's just like fascism in every universe. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe it always is. And historically, there's always been like a power structure and a wilderness. And the prophets are always kind of one foot in the wilderness and one foot in society. And they're often ostracized and things like that. And maybe that's the way that it will always be. You're like, as a nihilist, I don't have any like, oh yeah, we have to get to utopia and then we have to do this. Like, no, we don't. Like, there's no rules for any of this. Like, I'm just, we're just flying through space and I have this limited amount of time. These are the conversations I love to have. These are the ways that I enjoy helping people. This is how I can help alleviate suffering, both in, religious people that come to me or nihilistic people and suicidal people who come to me. And all of that is still meaningful, even if the power structure is always there. And so that has helped to stabilize me quite a bit in what feels like absolute chaos.
It sounds like you've been able to develop a healthy way to relate to your fear. And I imagine for a lot of people listening, like they probably want to get to the place you've described where you're able to sort of, just allow whatever's going on to go on and still stay rooted in what's meaningful to you. What advice do you have for people, I guess, for relating to their fear better or for changing that relationship so it doesn't feel like it's coming after them so much, or so it doesn't feel so impossible to find peace?
Yeah, that's a big question, but it's essentially anything that we do in exposure therapy. It's basically exposure therapy to your fear. If I was your therapist, which I'm not a therapist, but if I was your therapist and you came to me and you're afraid of spiders, we would first like sit with a picture of a spider in the room and just like, hey, how you feeling? And we're going to breathe through it. We're going to sit next to it and we're going to realize, and your nervous system is going to realize, oh, I didn't die. And then it kind of lessens the response. And then the next time we're going to have a spider in a cage in the corner of the room. And we're just going to sit there next to it. And we're going to be uncomfortable. It's going to suck. And then, the next time that is actually a little easier because your nervous system realized I didn't die. And essentially with our fears, we can do the same thing. The most grounded thing that I ever found was not finding the correct story that helped to alleviate anxiety. It was actually just being able to sit with my anxiety. It was being able to sit in the chaos. It was being able to sit next to death. This is why Buddhists sit next to corpses in various stages of decay. This is their spider exposure therapy. They're sitting next to a decaying body and realizing that it's going to be them someday too. And so, safely and if you can do this in coaching or in therapy, even better. But essentially how we make peace with our fears is to get closer to our fears and name them and understand why they're there and give voice to. Sometimes they're irrational. Sometimes we know that they're irrational. We still get closer anyway. And then in that process, we change. When I got closer to death, it changed how I lived my life until the point where you essentially are holding hands with death. Now, does that make me happy that I'm going to die? Not particularly. Am I looking forward to the process? Not particularly. But because it so changed me and how I focus my life and spend my time, it's an enemy that's become a friend and that I can sit next to. And so when people die, because I've gotten so close to death and my fear of death, it's not a surprise to me. It's built into my system. Whereas other people who haven't met death, it's almost like they're surprised that people die, which is totally irrational, right? Like we compartmentalize it so well that we'll actually forget that people die and it's an actual shock. And for me, it's not as shocking, but I had to go there and I had to feel those things and it sucked and it was hard and I cried and it's awful. But then you find that stable ground of the eye, kind of an eye in the storm where you can be totally at peace even in chaos and death.
Yeah, trying to push away our grief and delay it or avoid it usually just causes more stress in our body. And accepting integrating, especially like with life and death on such a big scale, is really does allow us to celebrate life in a more beautiful, meaningful, and present way than
Which
it
is
does
really
when we just try to avoid the concept of death.
yeah. And it's really interesting because people will tell me, oh, when you're dying, you'll call out to God, and it's this like, they're trying to stick it to me. Like, okay, well, when you're dying, call me. And it's like, okay. But we're actually, when we look at the data, it's the opposite. That people who have said their whole life, I am 100,000% sure there's an afterlife, I'm going to heaven. When it comes time, and you actually have to face that, and you've only been compartmentalizing it and using these thought ending cliches, and you haven't faced this thing, that we are more likely to see religious people really struggle with the dying process than we are to see atheists suddenly turning to God in the last moments.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, because I suppose having like a religious narrative, it's like a story that you're in many cases using as an avoidance strategy. Also, I feel like we talked about this in a recent video, but they do a study where they found that if you remind people like 5 times a day that they're going to die, the quality of their life goes up like a really surprising amount.
Catch me at parties reminding everyone about their imminent death.
You know how we can
This
ramp
is
up
a
the
real
vibration
thing.
party?
This is a real thing. There's an app for that. There's an app. It's like $3, and they get it from, there's a specific sect of Buddhism where, like, instead of like praying 5 times a day like you're a Muslim, you're reminded that you're going to die 5 times a day. And so this app will I had it for a while, and then it kind of got annoying, but I did it for a little bit, where it'll just randomly tell you, hey, remember, like you're gonna die, what are you doing right now? And like, if you're just doom scrolling, or you're just like, I'm in an argument with someone on Facebook back in the day, and that was back when I thought that you could just logic, well, I'll be able to convince them of, that why their opinion is wrong. And then I realized, like, I just spent half an hour arguing with this stranger that I don't really care about, and I'm ignoring, something important in my life. Anyway, so it actually can improve your quality of life to be reminded 5 times a day. And so there are some Buddhists who do that, and there's some apps where people like, I need to be reminded, and this is how I get kind of, instead of getting sucked into the neurotic things that my brain is doing, this helps me kind of zoom out. And so sometimes some people find that really helpful, but you do have to get over your initial fear of like, yeah, you're gonna die, like you're gonna be worm food. That's happening. That's gonna happen. So you do have to get over that part.
It's remarkable to me that people need to be reminded 5 times a day that they're going to die. I'm like, is everyone not just thinking about the fact they're going to die constantly? Because it plagues me.
Just a little reminder for everybody watching that you too will die.
Yes.
So something to look forward to. I go on walks to the cemetery almost every day, and definitely is good to like be like, oh yeah, yep, this is where it all ends up. So what am I doing today?
I think so much of wisdom is knowing when to zoom out and when to zoom in, right? Like, so much of wisdom is just proper perspective. Like, when I'm losing my shit over something stupid that I'm not going to remember a year from now, that's the time to go to the cemetery and zoom out, or look at pictures of space where it just like keeps backing up, and you're like, oh my God, like that thing that I was dealing with is so small and so tiny. And then sometimes it's the right time to zoom in, like when like, I have children, and so for me, a lot of those moments are with my children, where something is so precious, so meaningful, so beautiful. Like, that's the right time to just super zoom in. And so a lot of wisdom is just, where's the proper perspective for this moment right now, and do I need to be zooming in, or do I need to be zooming out?
I like that.
Yeah, that's
Death helps us with the zoom out, or sorry, well, I guess the zoom into our life, and then sometimes in the perspective of zooming out and realizing what's important.
Just kind of a random question I have, but you seem like someone that is really cerebral, like you live your life in your head a lot. Has it been a journey for you to learn to sort of feel your feelings in your body? And also, do you have any advice for other people who maybe struggle with over intellectualizing?
Yeah, that's a really hard one for me. I definitely spend all of my time in my head, and I have to intentionally find ways to connect to the rest of the lump of me. And really it was science that helped me to take that step. So when you show me the science, like doing some kind of ritual, if I'm in my head, it's like, this is stupid. This is made up. I don't want to be doing this. This, people are dancing and people are doing these things and this symbolizes this. And like, none of this is like hitting me at all. This is all stupid. But when you show me the science and you show me that even when you know that the ritual is made up, that it scientifically processes emotions out of your body, that it scientifically helps you to mark your values, it increases pleasure, it decreases pain. Okay, there's something here. There's some science here. And then, when I have people around me and scientific spiritual leaders who I know aren't going to bullshit me, like they're not trying to sell me something, they're not trying to take me into their cult, there's some safety and trust built into that. So when I have those two things, when I feel safe, when I feel like I'm not going to be let's do a guided meditation that's going to end up with me in a cult. And also there's some science here. There's some real science based on, hey, this is good for me. This is good for my mental health. That allows me to just take the step into the space and say, I'm going to go to this pagan night with my friends and I'm going to try it. And we're going to walk in a circle and do some witchy things. And we're going to let things go in the fire. And we're going to, I don't know, do all this stuff. And when I see the science behind it and I'm also with people that I trust, I'm able to step into that place of play and benefit from it. But I kind of have to see the science a little bit, and I have to feel safe in order to take that step. So I just encourage people who are very cerebral to, you're cerebral probably for a reason. People like to say that, oh, you're cerebral because you're smart. And it's like, no, when you really dig down into it, it's usually because we're scared or we've been hurt,
Mhm.
or that's our place of identity, or that's our place of safety, or that's where we went as a child when we felt unsafe. We could withdraw into the structures of our own mind and we could play there when we couldn't play in other places. So it's not particularly smart. I don't have a high IQ. Like my ACT is like nothing to write home about. And so when we think about cerebral, it's because usually it's a place of safety. And
Mm.
so if it's safety that you need, then make spirituality safer. Do it with people that
Mhm.
don't bullshit you. Do it with science behind it and understand the science behind it. That hopefully can give you the safety that you need to step into some of these places that can feel kind of woo.
I
But
really,
have
really
but
like
have
that.
good benefits, but have good mental health benefits.
Having religious trauma, it's often really difficult to step into new spaces and to group, spiritually oriented groups
Mhm.
without, just like being so hyper vigilant.
Mhm.
But I've had to learn over the years that there are actually safe spaces and safe people,
Yeah.
and not everything is a cult and not everybody is trying to take advantage, and learning to discern. And it is so beneficial. Our shared background, we certainly didn't have a playful spirituality. That was never,
Right.
it was
Yeah.
not creative or co-creative.
Mhm.
It was all very prescribed and, you know, serious.
Mm.
But I love how you mentioned that play being an important element there.
Yeah, that was helpful for me. The safety aspect was helpful, and then the play aspect was helpful. That like, hey, this isn't serious. Like if you try this, you don't have to like this doesn't have to become a thing. We're just gonna play. We're just gonna try it. And that gave me I love this meditation where you imagine yourself as a tree. And it's just a guided meditation. It's just a visual exercise, and then you kind of learn, it's kind of symbolism, like why did your tree show up in that way in this in this really interesting visual guided meditation. But I'm able to go to that space and play and like, okay, I'm a tree, like, and obviously rationally I'm not a tree, but I'm able to go to that place and play because the person who's doing the guided meditation is also kind of secular based or tends to be more atheistic like me. And so I know that we're going into this imagination space to play and see if there's any nuggets of wisdom about ourselves that come up that we can work with or understand. And then the guided meditation is where we end it. we know that we just played with our imagination. We're not actually a tree. And so when we do it in that playful way, instead of like, no, you are actually talking to God, no, this actually is a magic book, that kind of stuff, then it actually gives me the safety that I need to play in some of these spiritual spaces that sometimes can be quite, I because I'm a spiritual director, I try all the spiritual things. I want to be able to be familiar with many spiritual paths. And so I do all of these things, but when I do it with safety and play, then I can still do it even though I have my own religious trauma and cerebral, foundations.
Yeah, you made a TikTok where you were talking about, it was like a weekend retreat you went on that was a witchy retreat. I can't remember what it specifically was, but I liked how you talked about how there was that sense of safety that allowed you to lean in. Like it's important to be able to engage in rituals where you feel psychologically safe enough to fully lean in, to kind of have that playful abandon that can produce so much insight. Another one of your TikToks I loved was the one where you talked about the tree of contemplative practices. Well, first of all, my question is what elements of that tree do you tend to lean most towards on your daily life?
Yeah, so what you're talking about is a study done, I believe it was 2004, where we just wanted to find, that feeling of connecting to something bigger than you, that feeling of awe or transcendence or connection or spirituality, whatever word you want to use, that feeling that humans get. How do humans get it? And so we just kind of asked as many humans as we could ask, and guided people. And how do you feel this thing? And we found that even though meditation and religion and contemplative practices do show up, there was a whole breadth of other things that we've never really called spiritual. There are people who say, oh, I get that. I get that because I wake up in the morning and I watch the sunrise with my cup of tea. And that is my time where I'm connecting to something. I get that feeling. And for some people, it was their Sunday 4-hour bike ride. And for some people, it was their political activism. And it was showing up in all these places that we'd never called spiritual before. And so I find that really interesting. And it's something that I give my clients a lot to say, like, okay, we've had, especially if you come from religion, we've had this very prescribed, which is a good word that you use, prescribed spirituality, that this is how you feel this. You read these things, you pray, you go to the temple, you do these things. And when you're deconstructing from religion, you actually have to find, okay, those are some ways that people experience this feeling, but how do you feel it? How do you experience that feeling, and how can we build that into your life? And that was really freeing for me, because leaving religion, especially when I'm still in the spiritual space, I was still having a lot of shoulds in my brain. Like I should be meditating. I should have a meditation practice. I should be on retreat, and I should be able to be flexible, and I should be a vegan, and I should blah 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 blah. These are the brands that you wear, and this is the look, and I don't know. There's still kind of a list of shoulds, even in spirituality outside of religion. And so for me, really honing in on actually how do I experience that feeling? And for me, it's very much the process of reading or consuming information, and then also like processing and regurgitating it either through writing or my TikToks or whatever. Like that, for whatever reason, like taking things in and then processing it and then having some kind of output, whether it be a course that I do or a book or a podcast or a TikTok or writing. For me, that's my connection. That's how I connect to the world around me and other people in the story of humanity. For me, that is incredibly connective. And it's also connecting me to different parts of myself. Sometimes I'm writing and it's almost like I'm watching myself write, like I'm watching myself make connections. And once I realized that that's my spiritual practice, that's how I connect, I stopped the shoulds. I'm a spiritual director. This is officially my job. This is my full-time job. I've degrees, I have certifications. To this day, I do not have a meditation practice. I have 4 children. It does not work for me and my brain and my lifestyle. But I do take in information and write something every single day. That's something that I do. But nobody ever told me that, like, hey, make sure that you, on your spiritual path, make sure you're listening to podcasts and TikToking. Like, nobody told me that that was spiritual. Make sure you do your TikTok today so you can get into
So important to do
heaven or whatever, right?
The Buddha
But
did say
the Buddha
it is
did
so important to
say,
TikTok.
yes, you must make your daily TikTok. And so, but just the permission to say, actually, that is a spiritual practice to me. My TikTok is a journal. It's these long 3 or 4 minute videos. I don't make them cutesy. I don't have any kind. I don't know how to do any techie anything, and it's kind of just my journal. But it's because it's a spiritual practice of mine, because I'm just processing something that I learned about or something that I'm thinking about, and it connects me to other people who want to think and talk about that too. And so I just really encourage people to find the way that they have that feeling of awe, and to integrate it into your life, even if it's something that has never been called spiritual, especially if you're a woman. Then a lot of the things that we do as women have never been called spiritual. Girls' lunch is my church. Like, that is church for me. And that really helped to transform my spirituality, when I stopped the shoulds of what spirituality should look like and actually paid attention to when I actually connect. And now my church is girls' lunch, and my daily scripture reading prayer is a TikTok, and it's working for me.
Yeah, I've loved your remarks that I've heard about how a lot of the time so much of what we consider to be spiritual is geared towards men and what sort of serves them. Can you talk a little bit more about that phenomenon as you've seen it?
So it's not even just men, it's a specific kind of man has always been the one, at least in recent history, writing scripture and creating religions. And so when we had the agricultural revolution about 10,000 BC, we had enough surplus in our wheat stores to be able to support, for the first time, a priest class. These are people that could just be dedicated to whatever the religion of the day was, and were supported by the surplus in the community. So they didn't have to work. They could dedicate their time towards whatever God was the God of the day. And this is largely what has been driving all religious scripture, except for, the few mystics who had some scribes that could write down some of their stuff. A lot of our religion and what we call spirituality has been defined by this kind of priest class man, which not only hurts women or queer people or people who aren't that, but also other men. It's like my husband. He was never a scripture reader. He was never a prayer. He didn't like going to the temple. He always felt like he was less than because he just wasn't that guy. And when he realized that his, triathlon training is his spirituality and his community and his pilgrimage, once he realized that and claimed it as his spiritual practice, it made him realize, like, oh, I'm not broken. Just the scripture reading wasn't the path for me. He's not a words person. He just doesn't. It's just not him. So it really hurts not just women, but it hurts everyone that only a specific kind of man has been creating religion and writing scripture. And when we actually pay attention to the full spectrum of the human experience, there's a lot more spiritual paths available, which means hopefully then there's a spiritual path that you will resonate with, that it will work for you.
Yeah, so I love everything that you just said. It's giving me this really kind of clear image of the ways that, we have these like very neatly packaged, concealed, and marketed spiritual paradigms that are, often patriarchal and coercive and whatever. And even letting that go, you can still kind of by default fall into this narrow mentality of what spirituality is. And some who are, still in those camps might think like, oh, you're just like profaning everything and leaning into profanity rather than the sacred, when in fact what you're really doing is expanding your concept of sacred and eroding that boundary between the mundane and the sacred, and finding that spirituality everywhere, which feels like way more spiritually abundant and exciting and personal than these like one size fits all programs that were handed to us. by the
Right.
priest class. I love that you
Yeah, I know.
put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And actually that phrase that you used, finding the spiritual in the mundane, is something that I didn't learn when I was in theology. I didn't learn it when I was in religious studies. I didn't learn it in philosophy. I learned it from women, because women are the ones who don't have the time to have their, whether they're in religion or even outside of religion, like you were talked about, they're not waking up at 5 a.m. to do their ice bath and their 2-hour Wim Hof breathing and their blah, 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 blah. They wake up and their first thought is the needs of others around them, especially if you are a parent. And even if you're not a parent, women are often more relational. Their brains are more interrelated with their own brains. It's less compartmentalized in our own brains, and also our lives are usually more relational. And so this idea of finding the sacred in the mundane is something that I learned from women, but that took me a long time after my studies, because if I'm studying religion and theology and philosophy, it's really only the voice of men. I was often the only woman in the room in those kinds of circles. And so having that feminine piece just gave me a lot of freedom to be able to find that sacred in just in the mundane of life, and that really transformed my spirituality. And so I tell people who are like, um, who talk about their spiritual experiences, and I say, like, I'm with you. And I have to tell people, though, my spiritual experiences increased when I left religion. It is a daily experience for me. I don't, when I was in religion, I could go a few weeks, maybe even a few months without connecting to myself, because I would just be going through the motions. And me in my life now, I just have it so built into my life that I really can't go even a day or two without like that check-in, without that moment of awe, without remembering, like, oh, I'm gonna die. It's magical that I'm alive. I'm not very far from that feeling pops up for me in my life a lot. Not all the time, not all the time. But certainly a lot more than when I was in religion. So for me, being an atheist isn't about like screw religion and throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's like, no, actually it's because my spiritual life has increased being out here.
It kind of makes me sad to think about myself in Mormonism, and just thinking about all the sacred mundane things that did exist in my life at that time that almost got like minimized by my belief system, because it was like nothing is more important than this set of doctrines.
Yeah.
So it almost did like lessen my connection to how special a lot of that other stuff was. I mean, like how you said, this is maybe a bit of a tangent, but like you loved philosophy the whole time, and it's kind of stayed in your life no matter how, life pushed you in different directions with becoming a history teacher. But it's like I love that you like found your way back to the thing that was sort of there all along. I feel like there's probably a lot of things like that with a lot of people, and you always hear that advice. Well, I hear it a lot on TikTok, but from different people talking about how like the things that you loved as a child before you could like develop an ego and care what people thought are like often the things that are worth returning to later in life.
I definitely am playing now in ways that I played as a child, and psychedelics helps with that a little bit. At least remembering what you were like then, I think that helped me, because I started to get, my brain's neurotic. I have depression, I get dissociative depression, I have anxiety. That showed up by the time I was a teenager. So psychedelics actually helped me to remember what it was like when I was a child, which was just curious in all directions. And so it's definitely how I played as a child, and so I did find my way back to it, which is one of the best things that I love about Jesus, this idea of becoming like a little child. And we get it from Buddha too. We get it from mystics, this idea of returning to the play that you had as a child, where you didn't have, you weren't focused on how you looked. You weren't focused on, how am I going to build a legacy today or anything like that. It was just like, hey, let's feel how the grass feels on my toes. It was just that we were just in it. We were just in experience itself. And it took me a long time to find my way back to that place, especially with kind of my neurotic brain. But I do think it's a worthy journey to find your way back to how you played.
One of my shoulds that you kind of challenged in one of your TikToks was you talked about how you don't really feel connected to nature. I wanted to just ask you about that.
Yeah, that's not a popular opinion, especially in the spiritual space. I do like take my dog on a walk, and that's kind of my time outside, but I'm always listening to a podcast when I do that. I'm rarely doing it without. And it's not something that has really ever resonated with me. I don't get, and that's not it's not really a choice. It's that me seeing a waterfall on a computer screen or on a TV is pretty much the same experience for me when I'm there. Which is just like it's terrible for my spouse, who's very much a travel bug experience kind of person. And so we have negotiations when we travel. He knows that we're going to spend a day at some temple, museum, whatever, and I'm going to spend some day hiking up to some waterfall, and we make it work. But for whatever reason, it's not ever been something that really resonated with me in my body. But on top of that, a lot of people look out in nature and see God's paintbrush, or just see the diversity of life and how beautiful it is. And with me, and maybe you're this way too, Sam, with me, I see violence, and I see death, and I see unnecessary suffering, and I see that nature is brutal. And Neil deGrasse Tyson talks about this. He talked about this on Earth Day, because on Earth Day, it's like, oh, the planet is, it's everything is so balanced in this ecosystem, and it's so beautiful. And it's like actually, though, everything on this planet would kill you if it could. Everything on this planet is trying to kill everything else all of the time. The only reason we have diversity is because life is so yeah, it just is able to change and find some way to survive when something else is trying to take it over. And so, like, I just don't have a romantic view of nature. And so sometimes when I'm in a really neurotic place, nature is not the best place for me to be, because it's brutal and everything is trying to kill everything else. What is the morality of a lion killing a zebra? Like, really? Like, that zebra is suffering, and its organs are just like splayed out, and it's still alive, and the lion is just eating it. Like, and so this idea of like morality and beauty and all these things that and balance and all these things that people claim to see in nature, my brain is neurotic. I see death, and I see suffering, and I see a world that I could imagine being better and I wish was better. And so it's not my spiritual path. I listen to podcasts when I walk outside in order to get sunshine, because apparently humans need sunshine for irrational reasons that I don't really care about. So I do it because, to help my depression and things like that. But it's not a spiritual path that calls to me. It doesn't resonate in my body. And sometimes it actually makes me more neurotic, because it's so brutal. Nature is so brutal. And if you don't see the brutality, then I feel like you have a romanticized view of nature.
Yeah.
Amen. Have you seen that Werner? I don't know how to pronounce this. Werner Herzog. He's like that European director, filmmaker. He's like, he's setting in nature, and he's like, there is no harmony here except for harmony of suffering. Like, no God would conceive this except for to be a miserable punishment for everything involved. There is only horror here. This is not sounds of birds singing. They are shrieking in agony.
That was perfect. That's literally my brain when I'm like on a hike and everybody's like, oh, look at the sunshine. And like that monologue that you just did is what my brain is doing. And I'm like, whatever, guys, I'm just going to be over here having a real different experience.
I sometimes, even with like like the meditations, may all beings have peace. Sometimes I even struggle to buy into that kind of idea, because I just realized that the way that our world is for it to be the way it is. It's had to evolve this way, which is just a fucking shitty thing, but it's how we got here. If it was a god who invented it, it would be an evil, fucked up god. The fact that it's just happening makes it easier to just be like, well, yep, it just is what it is. But it's impossible for all beings to have peace, because the way that beings exist in this world is that they have to kill and eat to survive.
Conscious
Like
life.
animals,
And
the peace
vegans don't
of the
get out of
zebra
that.
can't,
Vegans think
a
that they
zebra
get
can't
out
have
of
peace
that. They
while a
don't.
lion has peace, you know?
Right.
Like all beings cannot have peace. So even though it's this ideal that I like want to embody, and I want to like fill myself with kindness and compassion and realize, yeah, it's all a shitty slog for everybody and way worse for some people and some beings, and there's no like fairness or justice to it. Yeah, it can feel a little complicated.
All right, Brett, come for our veganism. Do it. We're ready.
Okay, so no, I'm not
out of
saying
the
I'm not
endless
saying
misery.
I'm not saying don't be vegan or there's something ethically wrong about being vegan. The only thing I don't like about vegans is that when we're talking about these questions of suffering, they feel like sometimes, and this probably is not you based on what you just said, they sometimes feel like they got to exit that system of suffering because they're vegan. And when you actually do the math of the food that you eat and how many animals had to be killed for them to harvest that, how many animals were used in the fertilizer and the bees and the damage done to the earth to ship it to you and all of that, like you're not out of the system. Like you didn't get like everybody else is contributing to suffering on earth, but you are in this like unconnected magical place that causes no suffering on conscious creatures. Like even plants are at least at some level conscious and seem to want to live. They seem to want to grow and survive and thrive. And so can we say that it's more ethical than factory farming? Absolutely. If that's the hill that you want to say, like this is more ethical than factory farming, I can't ethically support where that particular food comes from. That's fine. You can play that tune all day. But it's the vegans who say like, oh, I don't cause any suffering, I'm vegan. It's like, no, you're still so connected in this world. You are still, by living, causing suffering on conscious beings that want to live. Like that you don't get out of that just by being vegan. That's my only thing about vegans.
Yeah, those vegans would hate me. But true, like we can reduce I guess our contribution to suffering through the food we consume. But yeah, you're right. There's no getting away from it.
There's no getting away from it. And even some people who say like, okay, well then I will unalive in order to get out of this system of suffering. That was a thought that I had when I was in my nihilism. Well, I'll just opt out of this system. This is bullshit. You know, I'm out of here. But even that doesn't get you out of it, because that just spreads more suffering in the world.
Yeah.
And then you are then you become the monster that you were trying to escape from. And what would that do to my children and grandchildren and great grandchildren? The trauma that it would cause would affect thousands, tens of thousands, maybe, beings in how they act because of the wound being left behind if I decided to leave this world. So this is dark thoughts that I'm speaking about openly, but that's where my brain goes. And so we don't get to opt out of any of this. And so the best thing to do is then, okay, if this is the nature of what life is, that I consume, and other creatures or things die in order for me to consume. And then when it's my time, I'm going to let go and I'm going to die, and my body goes back into the ground. I'm not going to do like a coffin embalming thing. Like it goes back into the ground and it like turn me back into worm food, because, I've probably killed millions of worms without even knowing it by the kinds of food that I eat and the worms that were killed as they were being dug up or whatever. And so it's my turn then to be worm food. And so for me, that's the best way to think about it, is to really be a part of this, which means your body is also a part of this too. And this is your turn for existence. And then your turn will be over and you need to let it go, because you were a part of this too, and you ate, and now it's somebody else's turn to eat. And then, limiting suffering in whatever ways you can in life. I think that's the best way to do it in this situation that we could imagine, if we were gods, we could imagine a better world and a better system of this. The existence of animal suffering is, I think, the strongest critique of a God, especially a Christian God, because even if everything else is fixed for humans because of the atonement and everything's going to be okay, there's no salvific reason that dinosaurs had to live and suffer and die. And what was the point of them? Like, what was the point of any of that? There's no humans to witness it. There's nothing.
To
So
test our faith.
like, for like that much suffering to test your faith, like
No, it's
like
terrible.
you couldn't create it so that if an animal was dying, it could just like a pain sensor could kick in so that it was and so it wasn't a painful death. Like you and I can imagine that, and we're feeble humans. You know what I mean? Like this is not a God worth worshiping, even if there was a God.
People always bring up the like, suffering has to exist and evil exists because God has to allow it. And it's like, yeah, but God didn't have to invent eye-eating bacteria and like viruses that slowly shred our internal
viruses
organs.
that like only exist to get into a child's eye. Like, why did that have to be created? And like, yeah, I did a whole TikTok on like the weirdest things that animals do. And just imagine, because I just wanted Christians, like, imagine you're God and this is what you do. Like, you're gonna create these ants so that when they get a certain pheromone from each other, they just spin around in a death spiral until they all die, because they're following each other, and they just spin around and then it just goes like this and then they all die. Like, what kind of sick freak like says like that's what I'm gonna invent for the ants? Like, that's ridiculous.
When you've been alive for so many millennia, you get kind of bored.
I guess, but
it's
it's disgusting. And then it's like, oh, he's such a great creator. And it's like, well, 99.9% of species on this planet have died. So I don't know like how great that statistic is. And humans, we were down to only a few thousand at some point in our human history. We're on the edge of extinction. So I'm not sure how great this creator God is. He seems pretty sadistic to me.
Yep.
Let me ask you this though. When you were Mormon, see, I can speak all these words now, but I swear to God, when I was Mormon, I didn't think about animals at all. Did you?
A bit, because I grew up in quite a vegetarian vegan family, but to be honest, the Mormonism kind of like suppressed that part of me. And I almost like in Mormonism, they almost moralize not caring about animals. Like Tana, you've talked about how like growing up, it was kind of a joke, the idea that we would want to save the whales. Like that was almost like looked down upon as a thing that someone might care about.
Yeah, and animal cruelty is almost, in some circles, especially among like young men, seen as like an act of masculinity.
Like, yeah, we talked recently on our channel about how for some reason, every Mormon man has a story about abusing a frog when they were young. And we said it in a video and we got so many comments agreeing like, yep, had a frog abuse story.
I would only think like, I was like, I can't wait for heaven when we get to talk to all the animals, without thinking the animals would be like, hey, fucker, why did you keep me in a factory farm miserable my whole life so that you could slaughter me and eat me? Go to hell, you piece of shit. Like
yeah, I had questions about like, I remember reading Mormon doctrine when I was like 14 or something, and wondering like, do animals go to heaven? Do they have souls? Like, I had those kinds of questions. But as far as like animal suffering, I talk a lot about it now, but I really like, you're right, Sam. Like it was really repressed. Like I just really didn't think about it. I really didn't even consider it. It was like, oh, well, it's a fallen world. What are you going to do?
It definitely
we did it. Eve, it's Eve's fault that like billions and billions of animals just suffer and die for no reason. And it's, oh, that makes sense. Eve ate an apple. So, tit for tat.
Tit for tat.
Honestly, I feel like religion, Mormonism, kept my empathy very contained.
Yeah.
So that I thought I was experiencing empathy for everybody, and everything was like, oh my God, Jesus suffered and died for everybody. Isn't that so beautiful? But really what I was doing was just catching a glimmer and not really realizing the extent of the differences of internal experience. So I was projecting my feelings onto everybody else. Whoa, Jesus suffered. How cool. He loves me. He loves you. Isn't that neat? And not realizing like, oh, people have vastly different experiences than I do, different degrees of suffering, different degrees of elation and joy that are all found in through different means, and those are just as real as mine. And so I didn't have like a ton of empathy, certainly not any empathy for animal suffering, but not even for most human suffering, to be honest. I had this idea that I did, but I didn't really like other people's experiences, the experiences of women, the experiences of queer people, trans people, minorities, all these, any kind of person who suffers. It didn't feel as real to me because it's like, oh, Jesus suffered for you and he'll never give you anything harder than what you have to deal with. And if you just hold on tight, you'll be so happy in heaven. Like,
and you have your little way that you categorize all those people that are different from you. And it's like, it's in the box. So that's kind of contained and I don't have to really think about it or deal with it.
yeah, refugees, God's got them in mind and he'll take care of them. And if
Jesus
they
was a
suffer well,
refugee.
they'll go to heaven.
Jesus was a refugee too.
Yeah.
It'll
So
be
true.
okay.
So true.
And that's a critique that we often get of Mother Teresa, that even though she may have actually been a kind person and maybe did want to help, because you're valuing suffering because it has some kind of moral salvific value, then actually when you look into how she ran things, there were times where it was like, good, you're suffering, that'll get you closer to God. And it's like, well, that's not really what I thought you were doing. And this is the big critique of Mother Teresa, was she actually helping people when suffering is kind of claimed as good in this Christian paradigm?
That's so funny. I was just thinking of her yesterday and in that exact phenomenon and the kind of cruelty that emerges. And I know also in her later years, she talked about how she felt disconnected from God and didn't feel that voice and that
She was
fire and that
super
drive and was just going
gaslighted.
through the motions. And the kind of like unconscious cruelty that seeps out of a person who believes that they're doing God's will, but it doesn't actually feel the connection and isn't enlivened by that experience of love and empathy, but it's just, as you said, like going through this institutional procedure and paradigm that glorifies suffering. It can elicit a type of cruelty, and did in her case and in other spiritual leaders.
Yeah, her story makes me sad because you can see how I do think that in her earlier life, maybe she did have a capacity for empathy and compassion. And she was kind of known in her village for that. But I do think that religion hijacked it, and the suffering narratives hijacked it. And then she became kind of a poster child that made her feel uncomfortable because she's writing to her superiors, I'm not feeling any of this. Like, I don't even think that God is here. Like, where is God? I don't experience God anymore. And they would just write back and they would say, oh, that just means that you're special because, they would make these, they would essentially gaslight her, but saying that because you're still faithful even when God seems far, that means that you're actually the best of us. That means that you're actually that it's this kind of some self-fulfilling loop there. And so she was like, okay, I guess I just keep going, even though like I'm not feeling God in any of this. They're making me this poster child. Now we have all these buildings and we don't have the proper, medical supplies to even be helping them. So I guess I'll just tell them that your suffering is good because it'll bring you closer to Jesus. And her story, I think, is a good example of what religion can do to your natural empathy.
Oof.
Yeah, grim. Also, we don't have to circle back to the veganism thing, but it just horrifies me that with factory farming, we've invented an entirely new degree of suffering that even in nature, which is horrifying anyway, doesn't exist. Like bringing like so many animals into existence to never be able to act out even their most basic like to never have like even a degree of freedom, like a deer that eventually gets killed in the wild. Well, at least it like lived
as
out
a deer.
it got to live as a deer in a normal way. But it's like we're bringing animals into existence purely to be tortured, and then we're like, with cows forcibly impregnating them, and then the most grief a mammal can experience, having their young taken away from them, that's just routine and for profit. And it's just I can't even think about it. I shouldn't have brought it up again. Yeah, nature already so horrifying, and then it's like we've like invented an entire, like we are gods in that sense. Like we are bringing beings into existence we're
To
kind of like the
suffer.
most evil god imaginable in that sense.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that we'll do that to our own kind and
Yeah.
still do slavery
Yeah.
still
It's yeah.
exists, you know. It's pretty horrific what we can get up to.
Yeah.
The devils of our own nature.
Some people, you know, I get into this question of if you this is another dark rabbit hole, but you guys are good company, so I know you guys can go here with me. The question of, do you push the big red button of, do you destroy all human life on earth? Would that actually be a moral good to do so? Because there's no victims when you're talking about killing all humans, so there'd be no one to mourn any humans, and then you kind of allow animals to just retake over the earth. And I've listened to and I've thought about this question a lot. It's an interesting question to me, and a lot of people, like, I had this discussion with Bill Reel, and he says, yes, absolutely, push the big red button, because that
Really?
would, yeah, because that would be a moral good. You would so significantly decrease suffering on earth that you should do it. And I guess, to me, the counter argument to that is, even though we talk about how humans can do factory farming and slavery and all these things, if lions got smarter, they would too.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? If a rhinoceros got opposable thumbs, they would too. You know what I mean? And so this idea that if we just kill all the humans, that the earth will become more moral, everything else would enslave everything else and kill everything else if it could too. It's just not as advanced in its evolution yet. So I don't know if that actually solves anything.
Yeah,
Anyways.
suffering continues regardless.
There is kind of a case to be made, though, for, again, as we've talked about, it's not like veganism gets you away from contributing to suffering, but it is kind of beautiful that as humans have evolved and like we most of us no longer need to eat animal products. It is beautiful to me that there are people who do opt out, you know?
So then is that would be like a good argument to not push the big red button, because if humans can actually transcend some of their evolutionary desires to actually live more peaceably and more moral, even though we also do terrible things, then maybe it's actually the best thing for the planet to have something on the earth that's that advanced evolutionarily, and maybe we just keep going in that direction and hope over time that we're able to develop systems that allow for more morality and well-being. It'd be an argument for that.
I'd say that's where I probably land on the issue, is like,
Mhm.
yeah, humans suck and are evil, but it's also, again, it makes perfect sense with evolution and all things considered. And it doesn't make it, you know, our proclivities any more moral or ethical or whatever, but it's just, that's how it is. And even without humans, suffering and violence would continue and likely continue escalating on those trajectories of evolution.
And there'd be no art.
That's exactly what I was going to say. But there's also so many things that make human consciousness so unique and so beautiful and connective and insightful. And I think it would be a shame to lose that.
And all suffering isn't, like, I'm not doing a Mother Teresa thing, but all suffering isn't negative in my mind. Like, it really is like a portal to so many beautiful things in a lot of cases.
Well, yeah,
Lately,
it's
I
inevitable and it's connected to joy. So like, you can't take them away.
Yeah, I really believe, well, for me personally, I really believe in that phrase, like, the deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain. And lately, I've just constantly been thinking about, I don't really know that it's possible for us to get to this place where humans are getting really good and moral and lovely. It kind of just seems to me like opposition in all things is like a really true statement. And there's like, if something can exist, then its opposite will always exist. Seems to be true. Thoughts? Is that anything?
Yeah. It is. There's whole philosophies that really, I mean, there's obviously Chinese Taoist philosophy that's very much about the balance between extremes. And there's golden mean, there's some Greek philosophy that goes there. So that idea of opposites, you know, shows up in various places and religions and cultures. And there's some people that are really driven, like they find their grounding by working kind of in some kind of philosophy that has a sense of opposites. So it's an interesting path. Yeah, it's one that shows up a lot.
Okay, yeah, I do really like Taoism from
Mm-hmm.
what I know about it. And yeah.
Because a Taoist, they would build if you build a dam in order to do something and then the dam breaks, a Taoist would be like, of course it did. Like, of course it did. Like when you're playing with these forces of opposites, when you're trying to force something to do something, it's going to break through in some other way. And so
Yeah.
Taoists can have a sense of a lot of equilibrium as they are just aware of kind of the dance of the extremes. It's a very interesting, I wouldn't say it's the way that I always view the world, but it's definitely like if you put those lenses on and see the world that way, there'd be a lot to learn. There'd be a lot to learn with that worldview.
And to me, as you were saying that, I mean, that feels Jungian to me as well. That notion of whatever you're trying to really shove down, hold back, whatever, is just
Will
going to come
up.
back in full force, and you can't really.
Yeah, there's some light and shadow elements there.
Should we do audience questions?
Yeah,
Is
we
this
should.
the time for that? We have a few questions to ask you just that people wanted us to ask you. And this one, I know this is kind of just the entirety of your work, so it may be hard to condense, but advice for someone struggling with deep nihilism and dark night of the soul.
That is a big question. As far as where I usually start is which is hard for intellectuals, which is why intellectuals get stuck in nihilism, is you do have to start with your body. Now, if I make you a map of 100 core values and I say pick one, you kind of have analysis paralysis. Do I pick this or what? Justice or compassion or which one do I choose? And so when we're talking about trying to find meaning and purpose and rituals and community and contemplation practice and awe and transcendence, and there's limitless opportunity, then that's analysis paralysis. That's too big. We can't function with that many choices. That's too much chaos. So when you're in nihilism, you have too much chaos. And so the first thing that we need to do is we need to somehow limit the chaos. We need to start somewhere. And the best way I think to start is that I think it's a benefit. I think it's a great thing. It's great news when you're in nihilism that you actually don't choose your core values. You don't choose what you resonate with or don't. It's built into you because of a mix of genetics and experiences. And if you want to throw in a soul, fine, and maybe even your soul. But whatever it is, you already resonate with some things over others. You already prefer some things over others. There are core values that naturally feel more important to you than others. And that's great news because that gives us a place to start that you don't have to choose in a sea of chaos that has no meaning and no hierarchy, and it's just chaos out there. You can't, that's too much. And so I would start with, how did you used to play? What core value still rings out to you more than maybe others? It's just kind of always been there. Maybe that's Enneagram work for some people. Maybe that's doing psychedelics and remembering what you were like as a child before you got into these nihilistic thought loops. But however it is, we have to go back to, how does your meat suit enjoy experience? And then that gives us a starting point. Now we can build on that. Oh, you like for me, when I was asking myself that question, I really like conversations. Okay, I'm going to start podcasting with Bill. I'm going to start talking on TikTok. I'm going to whatever. I'm going to schedule girls' lunch as my church because conversation, I just really enjoy it at the level of experience, even if there's no meaning to it, even if there's no ultimate meaning to it. It's how I play, it's how I connect. I like it. My body lights up. It just does. It's for no reason. It doesn't mean I'm better or worse than any other person. It's just what my body does. And when we start there, that gives us at least a direction when you're in a sea of chaos and all you see is everybody else's unique lives. And you're like, well, I don't know what mine is. We have to start with your body. Your body will give you a starting point for that, which is great news because then you don't have to choose. Then you don't have to analyze something to death. You just have to realize. So for me, the big shift was I was truth seeking for so long and then found no truth. And then my brain shut down and I got depressed and I had, existential depression. And when I realized like, oh, what if I actually do truth, but not in order to find truth? Maybe ultimate truth is outside the bounds of what humans are capable of right now. But what if truth was a game that I enjoy to play? What if I just played it as a game? What if truth seeking is my favorite game, and that's how I just like to play, and that's what connects me to other people? And then starting to do the truth, not because I was seeking some ultimate reality that I'm never going to find. Now that I'm doing it because it's a game that my body likes to play, that gave me a place to start. And so I would start with that. We have to get back into your body, which is hard if you also have depression with nihilism, because your body's shut down and you don't even remember what you like anymore. And so sometimes I would say little psychedelics to get that kind of nervous system reset, and then go back to the ways that you connect and you play, and the core values that stand out to you. I would say that would be the best way to start.
I love that. I love how you expressed nihilism being an effect of like a chaotic mind, and that seeking impulse that's been disappointed, and that analytical propensity that kind of has nowhere to go once the veil is torn away, and stepping into our bodily awareness and the things that just give us actual like good bodily sensations. What are those things that does that personally for me? And I think eventually that leads to kind of the Camus approach of absurdism, that like life isn't, you'll never be able to perfectly intellectualize existence. The more you know, this is straight from the Tao Te Ching, the more you know, the less you understand. And realizing that it's okay to not be able to like understand perfectly everything. That's not your lot as a primate on planet Earth. And that leaning into the absurd, the irrational, not to a dangerous degree, right? But on that personal level of playfulness and whimsy that brings just that childlike delight back into our lives, I think is so important.
Yeah. So for me, like, if I'm in neurotic brain thinking there's no ultimate meaning and there's no truth, and maybe morality is a lie, and all this, you can go all down these rabbit holes that, like you say, like eventually you deconstruct everything, and then you just are running in circles going nowhere, and you're just kind of trapped in your own thought loops. And the difference between the whimsy that you were just talking about, where if I can tap into the whimsy of it, where I'm driving in my car, okay, I'm driving in a car, I don't know how to build this thing, I don't even know how it works, I'm on a planet, I'm flying through space, there's sound waves that hit my ear that somehow magically like turn into an experience in my brain. And when I listen to Weezer, my body starts moving in ways that I can't explain.
Bring up Weezer.
I always bring up Weezer. I always bring Weezer because it's one of my like shortcuts. Like, hey, you're spinning on a planet listening to sound waves that make your body move. That's insane. That's absurd. Play with it. This is like, atheists or religious people claim sometimes that like, oh, if I lost religion, and it's just science, you just lose the magic. Like, that is goddamn magical. Like, what do you mean? Like, these sound waves make my body move. What are you talking about? Like, it's absurd. We're flying through a planet. This is everything about this is fucking absurd. And when we can snap into it and play with it and explore in it and be curious in it and be children in it, and I'm saying, these sound waves and they're hitting your ears, and then sometimes something that you say resonates with me and I'm excited to tell you what I think about that, and vice versa. Like, all of that is magic. All of that is absurd. Play with all of that. And then the tiniest little things, doing the dishes, taking a shower, driving in a car, doing errands, become this magical game. And I never thought I would be that kind of person, because I'm so I tend towards depression and nihilism and neuroticism so much, so deeply, that to think that I would find play driving in a car, listening to Weezer, and actually find play in it, I never imagined that was possible, but it has been for me.
Yeah, me too.
And always
once
Weezer.
again,
And always Weezer.
Our own little private island in the sun, in the midst of the void.
It's just reminding me again, like how sad it is that religion almost makes you so reliant on a big grandiose story that it does take you away from the magic of the everyday. And then when you're, so enamored by that story, so caught up in it, so psychologically dependent on it, to you it feels sad, the idea that someone would just be finding magic in the everyday.
People tell me they're sad for me all the time. That's a common comment that I get on TikTok. Like, I'm sad for you. What a sad little life that you live with no hope and no joy and no hope in the afterlife. And what just a dull, sad life that you live. And
Such a soft tell.
it just feels like the opposite. It feels like how sad your life is. I don't always say this because I try to be kind. I'm sometimes snarky. I try to be kind, but what I want to often say is how sad that your life is so lacking. You have to make up a story about the next one to live it. That's for me feels more sad.
Yeah.
And you feeling devastated over the beliefs of a stranger sounds like you need a more rigorous spiritual system to help you regulate, because it sounds like you're going through it over very little.
Bodily sadness right now, huh? Okay, you mentioned earlier talking about spiritual teachers that you can sort of feel, safe around. Do you have spiritual teachers that are kind of like your go-tos?
I have, so as a spiritual director, my own spiritual directors that I just like therapists should have their own therapist. So I do have voices in my life for that. I have a mystic teacher who I've had since I was at BYU Idaho. He was one of my professors at BYU Idaho.
BYU Idaho?
I did.
Yeah, we are alumni.
I was there much earlier than you. I'm much older than you. So I have him, and I have Jim Palmer, who runs the Center for Non-Religious Spirituality, and he does the training for secular spiritual directors. So I have him, and then Thomas Ord, who is my doctorate professor. And 2 out of the 3 of those people believe in God, but they know that I don't, and so they adjust their language to secular language with me in a way that makes me just feel totally comfortable and safe. And then, there's always like the Sam Harris types and Nick Jankel, and there's other people who are in the secular spirituality space that I just naturally resonate with. Alain de Botton, I really like. He wrote the book Religion for Atheists.
Yeah, so much.
I really like him too. So I have some people that where I know that I'm not the only one doing this. I'm not the only one who's trying to separate the baby from the bathwater. I kind of know the voices and players in that space. But something that I've been doing lately, I was asked on a podcast last week to just name someone who just inspires me. And I'll be honest, I for over 20 years now have been studying religion, theology, and philosophy. I have books behind me and quotes, and from mostly men, just because that's who's writing the books. And so many of those quotes have inspired me at different times in my life, and that I hold as sacred and scripture to me. But something that I've also started doing is saying myself, my goddamn self. Like, I, for the first time, probably just in the last 6 months, because it came up in a podcast where someone said, who's inspiring you lately? And I realized that lately I haven't been dependent on, a certain spiritual teacher. I've really just been paying more attention to my own lived in experience. I've really been leaning into that and just giving myself permission to do that. And so something that I have been trying to say lately, even though as a post-Mormon woman, it makes me incredibly uncomfortable. I don't like it. Doesn't feel good in my body to say. It feels like I'm being, all the things that a Mormon woman would think, I'm centering myself. But after 20 years of studying men and everybody else's view of spirituality, I would say I'm finally at a place where I can say, actually, myself, like paying attention to the wisdom in my own subconscious, and how I'm putting things together and how I see things. It's not that I'm inspiring myself like I've become my own God, but I have been paying attention to my own inner wisdom more, and that is more new for me because I've always been scared to jump into this space without someone with a bigger PhD kind of doing the work of legitimizing it first. That stamp of patriarchy stayed with me far longer than my beliefs did. And so I've been trying lately to also say, there are people in this space that I listen to, that listening to my own inner wisdom has been paying off for me too. And that's something that I've never claimed for myself before.
I love that so much. And you saying it is like, gives me permission to be like that. That is how I've been feeling lately. And that's completely valid and fine. Because there is such
like, I really used to like have to like even if I had a thought, I needed someone else to say it and be like, oh, okay, that smart person said it. Now I can say it and quote that person, right? And I've done that my whole life. My whole life I've done that. And even how, and so one of the reasons I wrote the book the way that I didn't do a lot of footnotes in my book. It really is, it was a journey of, I've read a lot of things. It's not like I'm just going off on my own here. I have a lot of education in this, but I'm actually just going to explain this in my own voice as if we're talking to each other. And I'm not going to do this academic thing of finding someone smarter and quoting them. I'm actually just going to explain it with my own voice and with my own wisdom, because I've thought about this a lot and I have something to say about it. And it was a risk, and it felt uncomfortable, but it also felt like what was authentic to me at that time. So I've been trying to lean into that, but my old Mormon brain does show up sometimes, and I'm working on it. I'm working on claiming my own inner wisdom too.
That's really inspiring. You ever hear something you're like, ooh, I want that.
I know. I'm like, that's going to be sitting with me.
I'm like, Ram Dass said you can be your own guru, so I can be my own guru.
Yeah. But you can't say I am my own guru, because we have to quote someone smarter than us saying.
Ram Dass said it's fine.
So I can say it. I've been doing that my whole life. I've been doing that my whole life. And so I'm finally trying to start to wean off of it a little bit. Yeah.
Very inspiring.
God, brilliant.
I love that.
Makes me so happy. I won't ask you to do a top 10 book list, but are there any books right now that are, ones you're finding yourself recommending more often, or ones historically that have been most meaningful to you?
Historically, just for secular spirituality, I really like Religion for Atheists, which is Elaine de Botton. I like Spiritual Atheism, which is Nick Jankel, and I like The Awakened Brain, which is Lisa Miller. That's our best science on spirituality. And I like some of Sam Harris's stuff, Waking Up and Free Will and things like that. So those are ones for secular spirituality that I feel like I'm always recommending. Right now, just so you know kind of what I'm doing, I feel like I spent the last 10 years diving into secular spirituality because I wanted to replace what was good in Mormonism in a way that was authentic to me, in a way that also helped me out of nihilism. It gave me tools for that. And that was a journey, and I wrote the book, and I feel like I know the science in that space. I know the people, I know the voices, I know the conversations. I feel like I did that journey. And now that chapter feels a little bit behind me, where I don't maybe want to stay in that space forever. I feel like I've kind of done it. And so right now I'm really digging more actually into nihilism and existential depression and existential crisis. I understand some of it because of my own experience and my own studies because of my experience, but I'm not an expert in it. I'm not anywhere as well spoken in it as I am with religion and theology and things that I have more education in. So right now I'm reading nihilist books. I'm reading John Vervaeke, and I'm reading The Meaning Crisis, and I'm reading more about existential depression and existential crisis and tools that people are finding. And so I'm reading some dark books right now because it feels like the space that's calling me to learn more so that I can help people more in that space and understand that space more. So my reading material is pretty heavy and dark right now, but because I'm in a good space, I can take that in. And then hopefully that will lead into the next book, which would be Tools for the Void, which I'm hoping with the next book. So my last book was really like, let's say you deconstruct from Mormonism yesterday. How do you rebuild everything that a religion gave you? I can give them the book and say, here, ritual, awe, contemplation, community, love. Here's the science behind it. Here's options of how to fit it into your life. Here's the book on it. I can do that. But I'm not there yet for nihilism and existential crisis. But eventually I hope that if someone comes to me and says, I'm suicidal, what's the goddamn point? All of that I could say, here's a book. Tools, resources, stories, quotes, perspective shifts, where to start. And I could just give that to you and say, here you go. So that's the journey that I'm on right now. Optimistic Nihilism is the best book that I've read in the space so far. If you're interested in that space.
Based on the title alone. I am interested.
Yeah.
We already kind of ended up talking about death a lot, but one person said dealing with grief and death. Again, just a really broad question, but dealing with grief.
Oh, that's the question. Dealing with grief and
Yeah.
death. To just get closer and just allow it to be there for however long it needs to be there. We can't. People come to me and say, how do I stop? I don't want to be angry anymore. How do I stop being angry? Lean into the anger. It has more to say. It has more to feel. It has its own timeline. You need to be in anger now. Let's go to a smash room. Let's write out all the things that you're angry at and have a fire and scream and say fuck you to God. That's what we do when we want to get rid of anger. We have to process it. We have to get closer to it. We have to give it voice. We have to get our body involved with it. So I'd say the same thing for death and grief. If we're because I don't have any information whether it's your own death and grief or somebody else that you're grieving, but whatever it is, find a way to get closer to it and get your body involved. Writing, walking, talking, just any rituals, going into bodies of water, doing fires, going into smash rooms, going to a graveyard and just laying there and crying and scheduling that into your day that I'm going to go to this graveyard. I'm going to think about my dad and I'm going to cry. Whatever it is, we have to get closer and get our body involved. And when our body is involved, that actually helps speed up the process. And then it doesn't last forever. No person, even in the most horrific grief stories I've ever heard, no person says my grief is the same today as it was 20 years ago. Like it shifts. It shifts. And it's still there. It will always still be there. But other things begin to grow around it. Just like, there's a forest fire and lots of death and grief and suffering. And maybe the marks of the forest fire will still always be there. But if you notice, there'll be new growth too. And you're a part of nature. It'll happen to you too. But get closer to it and get your body involved in some way would be my advice.
Yeah, perfect.
Love that. Especially for those of us coming out of backgrounds where, there's a category of emotions that are seen as bad or negative. You're not supposed to experience, let alone demonstrate anger or overwhelming sadness because anger is, a sin, and grief, over death or something may be seen as a lack of faith, that you don't really believe that you're going to see this person again. So to be really sad about them passing is, kind of
Like
frowned
a lack
on.
of faith, yeah.
But we do have to complete the stress response cycles of our own body. And if we're feeling overwhelming anger or overwhelming grief, we have to give that a place to go. Otherwise, it'll just eat us from the inside, and that anger and grief will all be self-directed.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that, the way that you express that.
And because it's so scary and overwhelming, it can feel like I don't want to get closer to this because then I'm going to get trapped here and I'm going to stay in this place forever and I'm never going to recover. And you can have that feeling like if I allow myself to grieve this, I'm not going to be able to function. And I can understand why we push these feelings away, like feeling anger and feeling grief and feeling sad and feeling all these feelings. They're not enjoyable sensations particularly. And so I understand why we want to compartmentalize it or take it a piece at a time, but that usually just delays the process. And so anytime that we actually can lean in, the data shows it actually doesn't mean that you're going to get stuck in that space forever. It actually means you're going to process through it faster. And so, we got to go through that. The only way in is through, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I love to lean in. I start crying over a song in the car or something, and I'm like, all right, let's go. Let's get it
go.
all out.
We bounce it.
That's funny.
I recently went through the worst physical pain of my life when we were in Costa Rica, and it lasted a few days. And one thing that really helped, which kind of relates to something you were saying about how grief doesn't ever stay the same forever, is I just listened to this podcast, thank God, the week before, about how, it was talking about people with chronic pain, but how when you have really 10 out of 10 pain, it's easy to feel like, oh, it's just constant. I'm just in 10 out of 10 pain all the time. There's no relief. Everything's just bad. But if you really tune in, you can notice these moment to moment, subtle fluctuations in the pain. So even though I would have described the pain I was in as like a 9 or a 10, because there was nothing to do but like truly focus on the moment by moment experience of the pain. I could notice 1 second where I took a sip of water, where because my brain was more focused on the sensation of the water going down my throat, the pain was kind of a 7.5 for those few moments. And I found that really helpful. And I feel like that's maybe something, I mean, when I was going through my divorce, that's kind of another area where I maybe felt that come in, where I would just like notice what was still, not in like a toxic positivity way, but just would notice like
there's
the
pain and
moments. Yeah, like
there's
there's
pain
always
and
both happening at all times. And I think, yeah, again, just tuning, and it kind of is like similar to just facing it generally, but just tuning into the moment by moment changes.
That chronic pain stuff. I mean, some of our best meditators now are people who struggled with chronic pain, and eventually their brain became just like super masters at this because of it. But some of my hardest clients have been people with chronic pain. Like it that's when like little things about light spiritual things like this just bullshit, like all there is pain, and it is a struggle. I have to work really hard with those clients because some options really aren't available to people who are in that kind of pain. And some of our best meditators, I think it was Joseph Goldstein who started with chronic pain. And also there's another one in the church, I don't know if you know him. He's like a Mormon mystic, Phil Mecklemore. Anyway, he's a Mormon meditator, and his journey was there through chronic pain too. So I am much more scared of that chronic pain than I am of death. That's for sure. I don't want to fuck with it at all.
Yeah.
It sucks too.
It sounds terrible.
Aside from the pain, you still have to like function in a world that requires you to work, to pay rent, to go to the grocery store, and to make dinner. And
I'm scared of it because my brain,
sit with your pain all day and be like,
right. Like my brain is so neurotic and depressed and sometimes suicidal just naturally, that I'm scared of chronic pain because I'm scared it would push me over the edge. So you chronic painers out there, you guys are the Zen masters for sure.
Yeah, honestly. The final question I wanted to ask you, because it came up from multiple people, was ways to find common ground with a spouse who is still a believer. I'm assuming that mostly came from Mormons, as it was our comment section.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I do have, if this is your question, I do have a full YouTube video where I talk about the 5 or 6 things that I do with clients when this is their question. So if this is your question, go to my YouTube channel, No Nonsense Spirituality. Perfect. I do a full video on this. But in brief, essentially what we have to do is find a way to connect human to human underneath our beliefs. And how we do that is we have to lower people's ego response. And so if I come into a Thanksgiving dinner and I say Joseph Smith is a pedophile, that's not going to be the way to do that. Right. And if I try to convert people, or if I try to get people to understand me because I'm just this black hole need of validation, that's usually what we get. We get someone who's a black hole need of validation because they so badly want to be understood in their faith crisis. And then we get someone who their subconscious senses there's something about you that is dangerous to their identity, their belonging, their community, their worldview, everything about them. And so their brain's only choice is to double down and put up defenses against you. They're not hearing anything that you say. If you send them a podcast, it's going in one ear, out the other, and vice versa. And so these people who genuinely may love each other will come away from interactions feeling just so hurt. They'll both be crying. They'll both be sad because they genuinely may love each other. And so what we have to do is find ways to dial down the temperature, dial down especially the believing person's ego response, defense response. And how you do that is not being scary. And so what I would recommend is saying something like, Mom and Dad, I so appreciate my Mormon childhood. I so appreciate the community and the upbringing that I had, and that I feel like I had people that cared about me. I love the moral education that I got. I love the stories of Jesus that you taught me. But right now in my life, with because my son is gay, I'm just not feeling Jesus the Jesus that I love and the Jesus that I see in the scriptures. I'm just not seeing Jesus as much in some of the things going on in the church. And so I'm choosing to follow Jesus in a different way and really help the marginalized by volunteering more with the queer community. And that's how I'm a Christian right now. And that's how I'm following Jesus. And just in doing it like that, instead of Joseph Smith as a pedophile, finding some kind of common ground, not attacking their entire parenting and making them feel like shitty parents, which they're just going to defend with their own ego response, and finding that common ground language where this is how I'm following Jesus, instead of something that's going to make them feel like you got taken over by Satan and demons and you're evil and you're brainwashed and all these things. Just doing that, it's going to lower the temperature and it's going to allow a human to human connection because they're not feeling attacked. They're not feeling like their brain has to defend themselves against you because you are threatening their identity and their belonging in their community. Brains don't like that. They will defend against that. That's the only option they have. And the hard part is that if you are the person who deconstructed, you are the person responsible for building that bridge because you're the person who has been in both spaces. And the other person cannot build a bridge where they have not gone. You can't build a bridge to somewhere you've developmentally never been. So the hard thing is then you have to do your own processing and your own validation so that you don't need that from your believing family members. And then be grounded enough to build that bridge with that common language, with things that dial down the temperature. And then when you do that and you get better at that, you find that you can have deeply intimate, amazing relationships, good family relationships with people who are very different politically and theologically.
Amen.
Perfect answer.
And it is the perfect answer because I didn't do that way when I started, like everybody else.
Yeah.
I've yet to meet an ex-Mormon who said I like perfectly did that in my relationships as I was deconstructing. I've yet to meet a person who like doesn't say, I wish I would have actually handled that relationship a little bit differently. I think I did some things that hurt my relationship in the long term and I regret it. So did I do that when I was deconstructing? Absolutely not. I was sending people articles. I was posting shit on Facebook. I was angry. I was projecting stuff. I was trying to get people to understand. I wanted so badly for someone to just understand me, that I wasn't crazy. I wanted them to tell me that I wasn't bad, that I wanted them to see that this was a moral decision, not an immoral decision. And it affected my relationships in not a good way. I was able to repair most of them, but not all of them. Some of them still really aren't the same because I didn't do it that way when I started. So it's good advice because it's advice that I wish I would have taken. And I've yet to meet an ex-Mormon who has done that perfectly as they're deconstructing, because it's so painful in the process. And it's so confusing at the beginning. I didn't understand why these people who say that they love me, why did no one ask me? Why did you leave the church? Not a single fucking person in my family. These people, like, I'm eldest daughter. I took care of everybody. I asked them questions about every aspect of their life. We talked about everything. And not a single one of them has read my book, has asked me why, like to this day. And at the beginning, I didn't understand that. It was so painful. Why would these people not ask me why I was leaving the church or why I was crying or why whatever? And it took me a while to understand that they couldn't. Like, brains can't when they're threatened. And when I understood that they couldn't, then I was able to have compassion for where they were, and able to meet and see the beauty of where they were, instead of like, why aren't you where I am, right? And see the beauty and the amazing things that people are that I'm not. Even active Mormons, there are many aspects of people who are active Mormons where they are far better as a person. They have so much beauty in some aspect of their life that I could learn from and benefit from. And so, yeah, once I got better at that, at grounding myself, understanding why brains work, and building bridges with common language that takes the temperature down, then I was able to be better in my relationships. And so I know at Thanksgiving in 2 days, when I go over to my husband's family's house, I know these people voted for Trump. I know they're active Mormons. I know they probably talk shit about me sometimes. But I'll be fine. It won't be triggering. And I'll have moments of connection. Are they as intimate as I would like? Maybe not. Are they as intimate as they would like? When I don't go to church? Maybe not. But but we're still connected. We're still connected. I'm still a part of the family. And it wasn't that way at the beginning. I was a little bit too explosive at that time.
I really relate to all of that. And to be fair, when we were in that phase right after leaving Mormonism, I mean, we hadn't like developmentally gone to the place where we were able to sort of like hold competing ideas. We were still, you know, locked into a lot of us versus them thinking.
Yeah, and like it's either right or it's wrong, so it's wrong, and so I should tell everybody that it's wrong and they're wrong.
I should definitely tell my husband's parents they're brainwashed.
Yeah,
that's going to be the move.
I definitely should bring up that Joe Smith is a pedophile. Like they'll learn. Like it's a gift, and then they'll learn
It's so
that
funny
it's
that
wrong,
you-
and then they'll come out of the church with me, and then we'll be best friends, and we'll live happily ever after. And we laugh now because we kind of thought that way, and it didn't work.
100%. And when people ask me the question of advice for talking to family members, I always start with the exact same thing you said, which is like, don't go in guns blazing saying Joseph Smith was a pedophile. That's always like my first thing I'll say too. So
I always have my finger on the button just in case. It's like I'm ready to hit this at a moment's notice. Something I want to say too is like to give ourselves some grace. Like for a lot of believers, it doesn't matter how perfectly or how compassionately you may present or approach or converse, they still may not have the outcome that you desire, which is, you know, to be fully seen, to be appreciated or, you know, respected. And ultimately, tying it back into the main theme, it seems like here that like spirituality is for us. We're not created for spirituality. It's something that we do for ourselves to regulate our own internal world, to take stock and inventory of our own mind-body connection. And we do these things in these exercises and strengthen our compassion so that we can have a more internal, peaceful experience. So that when I'm going to, you know, interact with people who can easily trigger me, it doesn't have so much power whether or not they see me clearly the way that I want to be seen. Or not, you know?
Speaking of grief, like that, you really have to sit with that grief that like these people are not going to be able to see you potentially. Like there's a real process that has to happen inside to become comfortable with that, because it's agonizing to feel like your relationships with the people you love are sort of permanently changed, and there's no guarantee, you know, you'll get back to where you were anyway.
Yeah, it does still hurt. So like even though I'm in a grounded place and I'm going to go over for Thanksgiving, and it's going to be fine, and there'll be moments of connection and beauty, and it's going to be great, and I'm really not going to come home in a bad place. I'm going to love being there. But is it always a little bit of a sting that nobody asked, how's your book doing? Yeah, it is. It's still there. But like you said, like I've grieved it. I have people in my life who are people who are validating and get to see all of me. And so I have that now. And so I don't need them to be that when they developmentally can't be that because of various complex reasons. I can just love them for who they are and how they are now. But it is a grieving process, and it's an anger process, and that needs its time. And then when you're in a more grounded place, you can find still moments of beauty and connection where you can still feel really connected to these people, even though you're in different places. In the same way that I can have moments of connection with a child, even though that child is nowhere near where I am developmentally. Like there's still moments of play, moments of where you just kind of touch for a second. But is the sting still there? Yeah, even for me, the sting is still there, and it will probably always be there because it is painful. And when we do get to the point where we have to talk about boundaries, I'm at least in a place where I don't have to have, I haven't had, like, no one's trying to convert me, and so I haven't had to put a boundary there. But if I was in a place where someone's sending me Ensign articles trying to convert me, the best advice I've ever heard for boundaries was, boundaries are the space that you need between you and another person to love them. And so I hear a lot sometimes in the ex-Mormon community, I'm going to put a boundary on this person, and then they'll realize that their actions are taking you away from the family, and they'll realize that their beliefs in the eternal family is actually causing harm in the family because they don't get to see their grandkids, and it's kind of this tit for tat game. And so rather than that, which is just going to lead to icky places, how much space do you need? What needs to be off the table? What space do you need between you and this person to truly love them? And if it's a serial killer, like, it's a lot. Like, I need you in jail. I need you behind bars. But then I'll
Yes.
watch the story and the documentary of your story, and I'll feel compassion that you
And
were
I'll
dealt
redeem
a
you in my
really,
mind.
like, you had a really shitty hand dealt in life, and I am sorry about that. I truly am. But I'm glad you're in jail. I need that boundary in order for me to feel like as a human, I'm sorry that this is your experience, and your brain is pretty, you got a bad brain, buddy, you know.
Yeah.
So I can do that. But when I think about putting boundaries up with people, what's the boundary that I need in order to love them? And then that leads into good places, instead of trying to manipulate
Mhm.
people with boundaries. And
Mhm.
the boundary is just there. Like, I need to not talk about church right now so that I can love you and we can have a good relationship. That tends to be better than trying to manipulate people's behavior with boundaries.
Yeah,
That's great.
it feels so pertinent with everything going on politically right now, because I see a lot of like my fellow liberals seeming to have this idea that if they, and again, boundaries, set whatever boundaries you need to, but thinking that if they cut off their family members, that voted for Trump, for example, that will teach them a lesson, or they'll realize what. And I'm like, people are not realizing stuff. Like, that's not
That's not going to
happening.
do it.
Like, it's just an ineffective tool. And I think it's
even sometimes the 4B movement, which it's, if you decide not to like you just don't want to associate with men and you don't want to have children, like, more fucking power to you. Like, scientifically, you're going to be happier, more power to you. But as far as like, there is some aspect of that that's like, we're going to punish men and then you'll be sorry and then you'll change and then
yeah,
you'll come groveling back to my door and you'll
yeah.
be like, I read the book on invisible labor, I'm ready to have sex now. And it's like, that's not really, I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah.
So we need to really be aware of how people's brains work when we're talking about boundaries.
Yes, because I think sometimes people just really struggle with, like, they want somewhere to direct their moral outrage, and it's like it's valid to feel that moral outrage, and I feel like I'll often get pushback when I talk about, like, don't cut off your family members who are like in a cult or who voted for Trump or whatever, because people are like, oh, they don't deserve to like have me in their life because like they believe all these things. But I'm just like, but if we're concerned with effectiveness and like moving the world towards like more positive ideologies, it's just a fact that cutting them off is probably going to make them entrench deeper into harmful mindsets. It's going to, when, an authoritarian leader like Trump demonizes liberals, it's going to allow them to more easily lean into that, as opposed to like, if you refuse
having a
to treat
relationship with
people,
you where that's harder to take.
it's like you're almost giving them authoritarians a gift in terms of like them being able to rob you of your humanity in the eyes of others. Whereas if you can treat people like they're more than their beliefs, that I think is a lot more likely to get you closer to them realizing that they're more than their beliefs. Because it's like when people feel like they are only their beliefs, and every time they see you, you only want to talk about your beliefs, then that's going to make them cling harder to that identity.
Yeah, I think that's an area people ask me, like, well, what's the benefit of not believing people have free will? And to me, that is one of the benefits, is that if you understand human nature, then you can understand the more effective buttons to push, and not in like a manipulative way, like I'm a puppet master, but in a way of like, if I want to have a positive relationship with my family, then cutting them off forever to punish them, is that going to actually get to what I want, even though it feels really good in the moment because they are being really shitty and all the things. And so, yeah, I do think that considering human nature and working with the brain rather than against it has actually made, and it's not that I've like manipulated someone into atheism. It's like, no, I'm just choosing to act in ways that are going to more effectively get me to what I want, which is well-being and good relationships and being able to go to a Thanksgiving dinner with people that I know voted for Trump.
It's another area where it feels like just acceptance as a mindset and grief work is helpful, because sometimes I think we just don't want to accept that like that's how people's brains generally work. We want to believe that there's some more satisfying like way we can channel our moral outrage.
Yeah, that they're fundamentally evil. is one that comes up on both sides. We're hearing the message that the other side is fundamentally evil, and that is a mess. I talked on TikTok last week. It was probably too close to the election for me to be like, hey guys, this is not good. There was a study there was like an article that half of Americans believe that the other half, that if you're on the other side of the political aisle, are evil. And I was talking about like, hey, we need to come off of this hill. This is not going anywhere that's going to be good for anyone. And I got a lot of pushback because I think people weren't ready for that, because we were still, especially on TikTok, in our moral outrage season. But I do try to harp on that, because people are just so much more complex for their beliefs, and whatever people's beliefs are, it is because underneath that belief there's some human reason that you can relate to. They're afraid of chaos, they're afraid of death, they feel like their family's being threatened. Whatever drove them to their beliefs, politically or religiously, is because of human reasons that you can relate to. So to just cut people off and just think that they're entirely evil and less than, is just not ever been a way that historically has been good for either side.
I find it also helps to zoom out a little bit and realize, like, when we're in the thralls of it with a family member, a spouse, parents, it's easy to feel this very like personalized pain and like, oh, I was raised in a cult. This is so crazy. But it's good to, again, zoom out and realize, like, a lot of people, most people maybe, have issues with their parents and their family. Like, it's not, there's a reason that, like, there's jokes about Thanksgiving with family that
everybody
beyond
seems to
Mormonism,
relate to.
right?
Yeah.
Right. Like, it's like family relationships are hard. Spousal relationships are hard. We come across our differences all the time, regardless of our religious affiliations. Like, we're always bumping up into the differences we have with the people we're close to. And so even though things feel like really challenging or really personal, it's good to remember, like, this isn't something I'm carrying alone. Like, this is my flavor of it. And there's some people who really, really understand. And it's so great to have that community solidarity. But on a bigger level, like, this is just humaning. Like, it's hard to human. It's hard to be close to other people. It's hard to have families. It's fucked up to have parents. And yet we do.
And it is hard to go over to Thanksgiving Trump dinner and see that they're humaning just like you, because I'm taking my children who have brown skin over to this family where I easily could get on some kind of rant and say, you voted against my children. Like, you voted for someone openly racist. You voted really against especially my daughters. You really said fuck you to my daughters with your vote. Like, I could think that. But if you really dig closer, when I really listen to why they voted for and why they're doing it, they really feel like they're voting for their children. They feel like they're voting for my children. They feel like they're voting for even for women's rights, because there's this idea that we're trying to protect with what's a woman by keeping trans women out of sports and all these things. And there's lots of narratives about this actually is empowering for women. And anyway, so when you dig down into it, they don't feel like they voted against my children. They feel like they voted for them. And so this is humaning. And we have to keep the conversation going. Otherwise, we just get more and more extreme. And when we stop talking to each other, that's when violence happens, because now you're not human. You're just the other. And that's when I can hurt you.
Yeah.
That's how Russia wins.
I'm glad we kind of touched a little bit there on some of the benefits of not believing in free will, because we've been harping on about free will not being real for like the whole time we've had our YouTube channel. And the most common pushback you kind of get is like the notion that it would lead to moral degeneracy to believe that. But we're always talking about how, like, realizing that free will isn't real makes you a better problem solver and like makes you more capable of facilitating systemic change, rather than just like getting locked into these ideas about good and evil that like really aren't helping anyone change and are actually like worsening the problem. I guess I was going to ask you at some point on the stream to just speak to the benefits of realizing that free will aren't real, even though I guess we've kind of
I would say the first one is just more compassion. Like, I can be incredibly more compassionate to a school shooter, which would be really hard to do if I feel like he just had total control and was totally autonomous. So one thing is just increased compassion, that if I were to rewind time, if you gave all the inputs to that brain again, all of the trauma, what they were reading at the time, their family relationships, everything that contributed into that brain, and you put it into that system again. That's the output that you're going to get. And that gives me more compassion, but then also it does make me more effective. People say, well, if there's no free will, then there's no point in doing anything. And it's like, no, it's the opposite. If there's no free will, then there are better or worse buttons to push in order to get to what you want. And people will say, oh, okay, well, if you're mindfully pushing those buttons, then that's free will. And it's like, no, that's still not free will either. But
maybe it
but
feels more like it, which is fun.
maybe we can talk about it, degrees of freedom. Maybe we can talk about degrees of choice and involuntary choice versus voluntary choice. Certainly, the more you're accessing your subconscious, the more options you have. But none of that gets us to what we call, a libertarian free will, that there's a part of you that can just kind of transcend all of the history and the neural connections in your brain to make some decision that's totally free. I see no evidence. Yeah, I don't see any evidence of that. But then also I do think it makes you more effective into getting what you want. So believing that my brain doesn't have free will doesn't mean that I just okay, I'm just going to turn off and let the robot do its thing. It's like, oh no, I'm going to pay attention that when I'm really, really stressed in my day, I notice that this machine will binge eat and then eat some gummies and then kind of feel like shit in the morning the next day. And that's kind of how this machine is operating. This is how this machine is operating. So if I wanted to not feel like shit in the morning, because I do get kind of a groggy wake up when I do that, what are different buttons that I can push that can give me a different outcome for how I want to end my day? Okay, I need to probably be seeing less clients, because when I go straight into from clients into parenting, into dinner, into soccer practice, into bed, it's gonna be too much. So I'm gonna actually leave some time before I pick up my kids to just come down and turn off work brain so I can go into mom brain. And then it's not so jarring to my system. Oh, I noticed when I pushed that button, I didn't have to eat 10 milligrams of gummies in order to calm down, in order to go to sleep. So that was better. And it's actually working. It's realizing that your brain is a complex system. You only get to see a small sliver of it. Most of it is in the dark of your attention. But as you pay attention more to how your system works, you can actually prime it more towards where you want to go. And people will say, well, that's free will. No, because where you want to go is actually also not determined, or actually is still determined, because where I want to go is good relationships and a good life, and a life that Socrates would be proud of, and all these things that have been inspiring to me and resonate with me. I didn't choose that those things would, or that kind of life, or the good life would resonate with me. It just does. I want to go in that direction. I have this one life. I want to go in this direction. None of that is really freely chosen, but I can work with it. And so learning how to work with the fact that the self is an illusion, and working with the lack of free will, can actually give you a lot of freedom and a lot of equanimity and a lot more resources for how you want to show up in the world in the way that makes sense for the absurd game that you're playing, especially if you're an absurdist. So it kind of helps with those things.
Amen. Understanding that all human nature is a system of cause and effect. Well, once you understand causes, you can more powerfully affect effects.
Yes. And where you want to go. And then people will try to always squeeze free will out of that. But even where you want to go, is I want to publish this book. Why? I don't know. It's just a desire that kind of appears in my body. I don't know why I want to do this. And I don't want to do, my husband wants to climb Mount Everest. I have no interest in doing that. That's not free will. Those things chose us. And then, but because it chose me, I can more effectively kind of get towards that.
God, it is such a treat to be able to just fling a topic at you that I can talk about in a 5 out of 10 way, and just have you wax lyrical at a 10 out of 10 way. God, it's so satisfying. It's like drugs.
This is my fun. This truly is my fun.
I get it.
and not everybody understands, but like we went to some dark places. Like I talked openly about suicide and big red buttons and things like that, and we had some beautiful, you know, spaces and moments we went to, and human spaces and compassion spaces, and all of that is just this is my playground. This is how I want to be spending my time, even if the universe doesn't care. I care.
Yeah, I really relate to that. I relate to hopefully not to insult you, but like I really relate to like the way your brain works, the way you talk about stuff. Like I
always tell people I'm sorry when they say that to me, because it means that you got a little bit of the neuroses too.
Of course, yeah, rampant. But
it's like I'm glad you resonate. I'm glad, you know, if there's any way that I'm able to help someone, I'm glad. But also, if you're resonating with me, I'm sorry that your brain's just not like naturally happy, because people who listen to me don't have brains that are naturally happy. You don't need me
like
if your brain
more
is.
Than you, so.
Yeah, that's true. But if your brain is naturally happy, like just you are just one of those golden retriever kind of people. You are just loving every minute of life. You don't need me. You're not resonating with me. Like, you know, so thank you, and also I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's funny to get older and realize like, oh, spirituality isn't this system of to-dos that I have to do to be worthy. It's like literally coping mechanisms, and like people who are super steeped in spiritual practice, often it's just because they like need a ton of help to self-regulate.
Yeah. It's like so many therapists. like if you are a therapist who went into family systems, it's because your family system is shit, right? Like we go to where we need help, and that's a beautiful. I love that story of the wounded healer in Greek mythology, and how we heal where we were wounded, and that's what hopefully that's what I'm doing, and I think you guys are doing that too.
Yeah, that's really nice.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Your content is a gift to the world. And I bet there are golden retrievers who find a lot of value in it too, just purely from the
I don't know if I've met one. Because like my stuff is not in my comment section, but my stuff is so long. Like it would just be a waste of time to a golden retriever. I feel like they just could step outside. They don't like my stuff. I'm very long-winded. My TikToks are 4 minutes long. My YouTube videos are half hour long. Like just by myself, not even conversation. Yes. And it's like going to this dark place, but like working with it. Like golden retrievers don't need that, and God bless them for it. And God
there's a yard to run around in.
And also I love like not putting pressure on myself to be a golden retriever, which I used to, and I'm sure maybe you guys did too, of like feeling like, why am I not optimistic? I'm just bringing everybody down. Like, what is the point of me? But realizing that, like, you know, maybe I'm not the most fun at parties. Actually, I know I'm not the most fun at parties. But when you are, when I have a friend or a family member who like somebody died, somebody's in this really dark place, like I'm the person they call, because you want someone whose eyes have adjusted to the darkness because they've spent some time in there. And so realizing that I don't have to be a golden retriever, I can just be my dark little emo self and help people who are also, you know, who are in spaces like that, even just temporarily, makes me feel like I don't have to be a golden retriever, and I don't have to be an optimist, and I don't have to light up a room, and I don't have to do any of that shit. I'm going to darken up a room. I will always darken up a room, but there are needs for that too. We need people who have made peace with the darkness, because everybody has to meet the darkness at some point in their life. And so I've made peace with not being a golden retriever. Black cat energy all day.
Yeah.
Yes.
Always emo. Forever emo.
In the car, blasting Weezer. Yeah.
Always. Till the day I die, it will be Weezer.
I once watched a coworker do cocaine at a Weezer concert at our company event.
Damn.
Oh,
yeah.
A real spiritual experience in the workplace. Love
he
it.
was having a good time at the Weezer concert.
Let's make a plan right here that if sometimes Weezer goes to Salt Lake, they rarely come to Boise, but if Weezer ever comes to Salt Lake, will you come with me?
Oh my god.
Let's go to a Weezer concert.
Honor to be asked.
Okay. It would be my initiation. I don't know a lot of
It is my
pilgrimage.
It is my pilgrimage. It's a sacred place for me, and I would love to take you if they ever come. I just saw them in Portland. They didn't go to see Salt Lake last time, but if they ever do, just know that if it pops up, that we're going.
Yes.
Perfect.
We're there. I have nothing else on. Oh, this was so great. Thank you so much for letting us mine your mind for content for 2 hours.
This is my playground. I loved this so much.
And I'm really excited that you're about to be on YouTube more, because that's my platform I love the most. We'll have all of your links in the description box, but do you have any specific stuff coming up on YouTube that you want to mention?
This week I did a review of Heretic, which I loved, which I'm sad that we didn't get to talk about, but we're probably running out of time to be able to do that. So I did a review of Heretic. I loved it.
Good.
This week I will be working on kind of a big report on how religion played a role in the election. So there's a lot to go into there, especially with people who are, you know, not only mixed faith marriages, but now kind of mixed political marriages, which we're seeing more and more. And so there's just a lot to dig into with that. So I'll be doing that this week. And then I think the week after, I'm going to do a video on how the Polar Express sucks, which is a hill that I continually die on every Christmas season, which is I hate that fucking movie. So stay tuned for that.
Do you know how Zizek hates Kung Fu Panda? That's like your Zizek hating Kung Fu Panda is you hating the
It's actually
it's off-putting. It's eerie. I don't like it.
Like the dead eyes and that stuff is eerie, but for me it's like very much like a gaslighting people into belief movie, because this kid is like, he's skeptical, he's trying to figure out the North Pole, and he's like gaslit and, you know, over and over into like belief. And then at the end of the story, like the happy ending is that like he's an old man and still believes in Santa. And I'm like, how is this a moral virtue? Anyway, I get super worked up. I go on a whole rant about it, and to this day it is my most hot take on TikTok because it is Gen Z's nostalgic movie. Like that's the Polar Express. They had it in schools, they had a golden ticket and had hot chocolate. It was their so I'm attacking their nostalgia. And to like last year, you know,
public transport, it's great.
or maybe it's like 2 years ago, I posted it on TikTok and just got like, I eventually took the video down just because it was taking up too much of my time, but I just got so much hate mail, like more hate mail than I've gotten from Christians and Muslims. And I cannot tell you how big this video got. And then they would stitch it and they would be ringing their bells and just saying like, you just don't hear the bell. And to this day, it is my biggest TikTok video, most controversial, got the most hate mail over it. And I've decided that it's a hill I'm willing to die on. So I'm going to talk about that too.
Oh,
hell yeah.
My nervous system, even imagining that experience. It's like, okay, well, cannot wait. As I haven't seen it, it would be nice to go in with fresh.
As someone who loves shitting on movies, I'm here for it. Movies
Just
of all kinds, but especially the Polar Express.
And there's this part where this evil clown tells the kid that he's a doubter, and it's like terrifying. And it's like, why are we showing this to kids? Like, this is gaslighting. This is just, anyway, I'm going to go off on it. You watch it first without seeing my YouTube video, and then tell me what you think. I'm curious to see. Tell me if I'm like particularly unhinged and being a little extra, or if I'm like on track with my hot take on Polar Express. I'm curious.
From what you've said so far, I mean, it sounds like you're around the money,
Spot
but
on,
we'll go in unbiased.
Gauge where I need to gauge where my rage is at, because I get pretty ragey with this movie, and I need to have some other eyes to see if I'm over raging it.
No, I'm such a Grinch for Christmas time. I was just shitting on Miracle on 34th Street. I'm like, what the fuck is that all about? Like, in God we trust, therefore that guy's Santa now? Like, no. Yeah. Fuck that. Well, thank you so much.
Yes.
Happy secular holidays to you.
Happy secular holidays.
That's right. All right. Love you guys. Keep doing what you're doing. And
Thank
I'd
you
love
so
to do this
much.
again. This was so great.
Yeah,
Yes,
come on anytime.
1000%.
Okay. Bye, guys.
Bye. Have the best day.
Okay, so you'll stop recording. I'll stop recording. But